What's up, guys? It's me, Hunter Reptile Vents, and it's time to do the most important thing that I need to teach you guys. Is the do's and don'ts. So here is why it's important to teach you guys about this. Okay, so you want to know what the do's and don'ts are? Well, it's the things you need to learn when owning snakes. So this video is going to be about owning snakes. So this will be do's and don'ts. So this is the things you need to learn about owning snakes, and this is important. The reason why, so you know when to be, so it'll teach you responsibility of owning the snakes, and teaches you what you need to know about them, owning them and stuff. So without further ado, let's get on to the video. To let you know, guys, this video is going to be in two parts. So one part's going to be for do's, and one part's going to be for don'ts. So this week, today, I'm going to do the do's in this video, and next week I'm going to do the don'ts. So that way, you will know the don'ts when working with snakes. Without further ado, let's learn about the do's of owning snakes. Alright, first do is to check the internet. The reason why is because you always gotta do your research when owning snakes. Before you get a snake, it's important you actually go on the computer to check for research to make sure you know what you're actually getting yourself into when buying a snake. So the reason why is because this is important is that you need to know about the care, you need to know what kind of snake you need to start with, and you need to know about the details, what to go through when buying a snake and stuff. Also, another important thing you need to know is your state laws. Even though I don't really think it's a good idea for states to ban snakes at all, I don't think it should be necessary. But still, that's how it is in this. That's how it is in this world and stuff. But like I said before, it's important to do research when buying a snake, because when buying a snake, because it's important to know the details before you get into that kind of stuff. Before buying a snake, before buying all the stuff you need, it's important you do research. Go on the computer and do research on what snake you want to buy, and always know the details. Make sure you take notes and make sure you know what you're getting yourself into when buying a snake and stuff. Also, make sure you research the snakes that could be your first snake to buy. Yeah, a first-time snake, which is another thing you should know about snakes. And when you're actually owning a snake for the first time, you gotta know which snakes are recommended to buy for a first-time owner, because there are some snakes out there that could be really difficult to work with, and there are some snakes that could be difficult in captivity. So it's always important to know that. It's always really important to know that. So this also will teach you how to be a responsible owner. So yeah, it's important about that. So that's the first do is actually research. So yeah, do your research before getting a snake. Now let's go to the next do. Alright, now for next do. The other thing you should know about is supplies. Also, enclosure. That's right, enclosure. We're going to learn about enclosures too for this next do. So, when buying a snake, you gotta have an enclosure. Yeah, before you buy a snake, you gotta have an enclosure. You gotta have supplies. So, what kind of supplies you need? You need feeder tongs. If you have a snake that needs like long feeder tongs, you're gonna need some long feeder tongs. These are 12 inches. Now, I do have some 18 inches in the closet. So yeah. This is an example of feeder tongs. So I'm showing you an example right here whenever you're getting a snake and stuff. Now I've seen some snake owners do hand feed and everything like that, but no, I don't recommend that at all. And I will talk about that in the don'ts when I get to that and stuff. But anyway, feeder tongs are a must to buy whenever you're feeding a snake. Substrate scooper. This is a substrate scooper. Use this to actually scoop the substrate you need to get out of the tank. The reason why is because when you're cleaning your snake's enclosure, you always gotta have this to scoop the substrate into a bag. So this way, you actually have. This way you actually have, like, something to scoop with. So yeah, it's important to have this, indeed. Another thing is the snake hook. Yeah, depending on how big your snake is, and depending on how difficult your snake is to work with, you always have a snake hook. The reason why is because it's important to have this. This way you actually are safe of working with your snake. Now, some people do actually free handle snakes, even though it sometimes can be risky to do. So you gotta be very careful when you're doing free handling snakes. It depends on the snake trusts you of free handling and stuff. Now, some snake keepers say that free handling is irresponsible, but I don't think it is. It's not. It depends on how you do it. It all depends on how you basically handle a snake. Make sure you handle your snake right. So always make sure you handle your snake right whenever you're working with a snake. And make sure you use the tools properly. If you don't use the tools properly, there's no point if you own a snake. So make sure you use the tools properly and make sure you handle your snake the correct way. The right way. And yeah, so make sure you're actually holding your snake right. Make sure you're handling your snake right whenever you're working with it and stuff. So yeah, now let's go to the next do. Alright, enclosures. So another thing you should buy whenever working with snakes, because this is also another thing you should get. Now, these enclosures I actually have in my room are built by me. Well, even though I did have some help to actually build these enclosures, but still, these are also important to get. It's always an option. You can buy an enclosure or you can build one. So it depends on which one you want to get. But also, another important thing in the amount of enclosures is knowing what enclosure you have to use whenever you're getting a snake. When you're getting a snake, if you're getting a high humidity, do not ever get screen top cages. Screen top cages will make the humidity dry out. So it's important to not get those cages. It's important you get cages like these. If you build your own cage, or get cages that are from sites that are recommended, like Animal Plastics and other sites that have good enclosures, or just get a Reptile fogger and get that to keep your humidity good and stuff. Yeah. But anyway, it's important to buy enclosures. This way your snake is secured. This way your snake has a space to roam around in and everything. So yeah, that's good. Yeah. Stuff. Of course, you gotta clean it, and of course, you gotta change light bulbs for it because heat bulbs will go out every 6 months. So it's best to always make sure you check on that, and make sure you check on the enclosure to clean it and everything and stuff. And we are going to get into that in this video about cleaning enclosure and stuff. So yeah. So without further ado, let's go to the next do. Next do is cleaning the enclosure. Okay, so now you don't always have to deep clean the enclosure, because when owning snakes, some snakes will still do fine if you spot clean enclosure. If you spot clean enclosure, it will still be good and clean for a snake. But when it comes to deep cleaning, that's another thing I need to tell you about. It's the knowing the cleaner stuff you use. Make sure you use cleaners that have no harmful stuff. Yeah, make sure you're actually reading the descriptions of the cleaners that you're using. It's not harmful to animals. The reason why is because you don't want your snake to go back into an enclosure that has toxic chemicals. And you don't want that at all. You don't want that at all. Even though if you wipe them down, there's so many toxic chemicals on there, because toxic chemicals are hard to get rid of. They really are hard to get rid of, indeed. You always gotta make sure you wipe down every premise of that enclosure, making sure there's no toxic chemicals left whenever you're cleaning your enclosure and stuff. So it's best to buy chemicals that are actually safe to your animals. So yeah, make sure you're actually animal safe. Yeah, read the labels. Yeah, so always make sure you know what kind of chemicals you're buying. I recommend you buy plant-based all-purpose cleaner. Those are good cleaners to buy. Or you can buy some cleaners that actually reptile keepers actually recommend. Like the stuff that starts with F. I can't remember the name what it was, but I know that stuff actually works great for cleaning a snake's enclosure and stuff. But of course, you still gotta mix it with water and make sure you don't use too much of it because it can lead to toxic chemicals and stuff. Yeah, make sure you use a right amount of it and everything. But anyway, so it's important you check the chemicals. Make sure you're using the stuff that is actually good for cleaning. Now, when it comes to cleaning, it's important you actually clean and snake enclosure for only up to 3 months each. Reasons why, because you don't need to clean enclosure that much. Reasons is because if you end up taking your snake out multiple times, you're going to stress the snake out and stuff. It's going to stress it. It's going to be stressed out whenever you do that. So that means you're going to keep on stressing. It means your snake will be not healthy if you keep on doing that. So yeah, that's why spot cleaning is another thing you should do whenever you clean enclosure and stuff. So you can get all that. So that way you don't have to stress out your snake whenever you're cleaning enclosure and stuff. However, your snake escape risk. It's important to get the snake out and put it into a container and then get the poop out of there. So you want to deal with that and stuff because sometimes snakes can be because sometimes cleaning a cage and always watching a snake can be a bit difficult to know when a snake is going to try and get out. You always make sure you keep an eye on a snake while you're cleaning the enclosure and stuff. So yeah, you always have to make sure you keep an eye on a snake if you're actually spot cleaning. Yeah, it's always important that. It's kind of like where people work on an animal shelter. You always got to keep an eye on an animal, making sure the animal trusts you in that kennel. So it's like that. Yeah. So that's always important when it comes to spot cleaning and stuff. Yeah. All right. Now to the next do is making your enclosure. Yeah. So your enclosure. When it comes to designing an enclosure for your snake, you always gotta know their care, what they need in their environment, and knowing what they actually need in their enclosure. So, for example, I have here substrate that is actually dry for the bull snakes, and cypress mulch, and even dry substrate for my Brazilian smooth snake right here. So yeah, it's always important to have certain substrates for certain types of snakes. If your snake recommends high humidity, make sure you buy a substrate that keeps the humidity in, and make sure you have some things to keep the humidity. Like for example, let me get this thing here. For example, this is a water sprayer, and yes, I know they actually put chemicals in this one, but this only has water in it, so it has filter water in it. It's important to use filter water because if you use non-filter water, then that actually will not be good for the snake. Yeah, do not use filter water, and we'll talk more about that in the don'ts. But anyway. This is actually good to use whenever you have a high humidity snake. So if you have a snake that's high humidity, it's important to have this whenever you try and get the snake the right humidity levels and stuff. Or you can install a mister that recommends electricity and everything else and stuff. So yeah, it's important to do all that. Alright, next do is to feed your snake. Yes, it's important to feed your snake, but when should you actually feed it? Yeah, you always gotta keep a schedule. It's important you always have a schedule to know when to feed your snake. Because some snakes recommend to be fed a week each, 2 weeks each, or probably a month each. My snakes that snakes do have a schedule. Bull snakes, they're 2 weeks, 2 weeks to 3 weeks each. My blood python, she's 2 to 3 weeks each, and my Brazilian smooth snake, he is 1 to 2 weeks each when it comes to feeding him. Now some snakes will eat twice a week or something like that. It depends on their care. It depends on a recommendation, how much you feed them and stuff. Now also another thing people always ask me, is it important to feed them live or frozen thawed? Which one's better? I recommend frozen thawed. Frozen thawed is better in my opinion because that way you won't have any diseases to deal with when it comes to dealing with a live rodent. Now some rodents may carry diseases when they're alive because when you're feeding a snake a live rodent, you always gotta make sure that the rodent's actually healthy. So yeah, you always gotta make sure the rodent's actually healthy before you feed it to the snake. Make sure the rodent doesn't have diseases or anything like that. And that's gonna be kind of hard to figure out because you never know if the rodent has any bacteria or has anything that can actually harm the snake, because you never know. So, and if also the snake doesn't eat the rodent, you gotta risk yourself getting that rodent out of there, and that could be really difficult. And yeah, you never know if the snake might try to bite you and stuff. And some snakes do have active feeding responses, so you always gotta make sure you watch out for that. You gotta watch out for that because the next thing you know, your snake might accidentally bite you, and that's gonna happen. Because that's gonna happen. And that's another thing I should mention to you, is knowing when your snake's gonna bite you. Like for example, when I mentioned you guys handle your snake right. If you don't handle your snake right, it's gonna bite you. It's kind of same with a cat and dog. If you don't handle a dog right, it's gonna bite you. If you don't handle a cat right, it's gonna bite you. No matter what. These are examples of frozen rats. So I always buy these for my snakes. So yeah, it's important to actually have these whenever you're feeding snakes, and also yeah, make sure you're getting the right food. Make sure you're getting the right stuff. Make sure you're getting the right stuff whenever you're feeding your snakes. Also, don't overfeed your snakes. Yeah, don't overfeed your snakes. Make sure you go by schedules whenever you're feeding your snakes. So yeah, that's another thing you should learn whenever you're feeding your snakes. And we'll actually talk more about that in the don'ts. Don't overfeed your snake. Yeah, don't overfeed it. We'll talk about more of that in the don'ts. But anyway, it's important to feed your snake so the snake is healthy, making sure your snake has actually got good health benefits and everything else. So make sure your snake is actually good and healthy. So yeah, make sure your snake is eating well. Make sure everything is going well with your snake. So always make sure you're knowing everything that goes along with that. Another do is to actually check the heat bulbs to make sure they're actually up to date to change. So yeah, it's important to make sure you change the heat bulbs every 6 months. So you always make sure if the heat bulb goes out, go ahead and change it. Make sure you have heat bulbs with you at all times. And make sure you always use the right wattage for your snakes to know which snakes get the right heat and stuff. Because each one of these bulbs right here, I have my enclosures are 40 watts, so except for the bottom one, which is actually just a LED, and he has a heating pad in his enclosure and stuff. Another thing I should mention, heating pads. When you're heating it and heating snakes, the heat, make sure it's actually done by a temperature gauge. Okay, these right here is when you're on snakes, when you're using heat pads, you gotta have one of these things. A temperature gauge is knowing what temperature you're using when you're using heat tapes or heat pads. That way you'll know temperature and stuff, because that's for saying it's recommended and stuff. So yeah, and yeah, there's a heating pad in this enclosure that's recommended. It's actually for the snake, so they get the right heat. So yeah, that's for non-basking snakes. So yeah, these are important things you need to know when getting a snake. The heat bulbs and all that heat bulbs, because they need heat. So that way, if they get too cold, you need a heat bulb. Yeah, you want to make sure your snakes don't get too cold at all. So you guys have everything you should make sure. So, all right, last do is the most important thing ever. Keep your snake enclosures locked at all times. The reason why this is important is because you do not want your snakes to escape. Now, even though that is possible to happen because snakes are very good escape artists, but if you have a lock on your enclosure, this way your snakes are not going to escape. And also, if you have key locks, this way people won't actually try to get into your snake cage and try to take your snake, or try to make the snake escape themselves. So yeah, it's also good. It's also important to buy a snake enclosure that's actually very secured. Make sure you actually buy a secured enclosure, because if you don't, then there's no reason for you to keep a snake. Because snakes are good escape artists, so it's important you buy a snake enclosure that's actually really secured. So you have to make sure you buy one. So yeah. Anyway, guys, I'm Hunter Ivy for Top Thanks for watching, and I hope you actually learn from this. And next week will be the don'ts. So keep your eye on that. Anyway, guys, I'm Hunter Ivy for Top Thanks, and I'll see you guys later. Bye.